A young Greek adventurer, Protus, hops onto the shore of a cove from his ship, where he would meet the king Nanus and his tribe. Nanus would invite the crew to the husband-picking ceremony of his daughter Gyptis. Gyptis would choose Protus to be her husband, and together they would found the oldest city in France, Massalia. To begin, there are a loose collection of tribes split into 4 different regions by the Romans. They called these regions Celtica, Belgica, Narbonensis, and Aquitania. The first Roman conquest north of the Alps would be to conquer Narbonensis, to link their territories in the Iberian Peninsula to their homeland in the Italian Peninsula. The tribes that resided there were upset that this new empire simply waltzed into their land and claimed that it was gifted to them. So they began to raid and threaten the cities built. These threats only cemented the demise of these people, since the Roman leader at the time would use them as an excuse to conquer the rest of Gaul. Although common in culture, the people of Gaul failed to form any unified army. Many people were pushed beyond the Rhine at this time, but those who weren't didn't go down without a fight. It took several years after the conquest of Gaul to quell all of the rebellions happening within the territory. Postumus, a Roman general, saw weakness in Rome, so he declared himself independent and the leader as the new Gallic Empire. All the while, a Germanic tribe, one that the Romans once called an ally, were sending raids across the Rhine. The Romans would call these people the Franks. The Franks saw the overextendedness and the instability of the empire, and they launched an all-out attack upon them. After several sieges of the town of Cologne, the Franks had their first foothold in the Roman territory. They conquered northeastern France, and following them was a wave of immigrants from the Germanic region. At the same time, the Soissons declared independence, the Britons took Brittany, Visigoths took southern France, and Burgundy took central France. After some time, Clovis, king of the Franks, would lead a military campaign against the Soissons, which would be fueled by anger, since the Soissons were considered the last Roman holdout in Gaul, since they were led by a Roman general. This would be no great feat for Clovis, since the Franks were known to be adept and skilled fighters. After conquering Paris, Clovis saw its military advantageousness and moved his capital there. Although the Franks had conquered a lot of territory, they still starved for more. And they got their wish when the Alemanni attacked their ally. The ensuing war was brutally fought. And, as legends go, at the final battle of the war, when each side was evenly matched, Clovis saw his men wavering, and he promised to God that if he won, he would become a Christian king. And they won. He was promptly baptized and declared the Franks a Christian kingdom. Now, Francia had a border with the Visigoths, and they declared war upon them, that raged into the Pyrenees Mountains. But that is where Francia met a stalemate. But they did gain a province of Aquitania in the peace treaty. Soon after, Clovis dies, and the country is split between his 4 sons. A very common theme. Following this is a series of 4 civil wars with unclear starts and ends and treaties that mean nothing. That would run this video to several hours long. So we're going to skip ahead a bit. All you need to know is that France is united and Aquitania is independent. So, the Umayyad Caliphate declares war on Aquitaine, and they are repelled, but not without a devastating toll on the state. Francia takes the opportunity of this weakened state, and they conquer Aquitania. So finally, after years of family feud, and not the fun kind, Francia was united. Soon after, the king of Francia died, and another civil war almost broke out. But one of the sons died, and the son who inherited the kingdom was Charlemagne. Yes, the infamous Charlemagne. And he declared war on the Saxons and the Frisians, who had meddled in past civil wars, easily defeating them and pushing further into Germanic lands. At the same time, Charles declared war on the Lombards across the Alps, and by the end of this war, the Franks had owned almost all of the Italian peninsula, and declared the Pope a protectorate state. The Franks now pushed into eastern Germany and the northern Balkans, but around this time Charlemagne died, resulting in, you guessed it, another civil war. The nations that emerged from this civil war, East Francia, West Francia, and Middle Francia, are all important to the development of a modern nation, but for our sake, we're only going to be looking at West Francia. West Francia pushed into Middle Francia, and at the Treaty of Meissen, they gained territory all along their borders. There's a man, highly favored by the nobles, who was asked to sit on the West Frankish throne when the old king died. Charles the Fat had already been ruling Middle and East Francia, so, for some time, he ruled a united Francia, the last man to do so. But when the Vikings sieged Paris, his nephew broke away and claimed himself the ruler of the East Franks. And now, Francia was divided once again. At this time, nobles all around France declared themselves as independent duchies, drastically limiting the crown land and the power of the Frankish king. It would take many decades for Frankish kings to unite their lands under one crown through marriages, inheritances, and wars. Then, a council was called by the Pope in southern France, who pleaded with Western European kingdoms to help with repelling the Muslim Turks from the Byzantine Empire. The response from the French nobility and commoners was overwhelming. The French made up most of the Crusaders, who happily made their pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Although, after several years, the Holy Lands were lost from the Europeans for many years to come. So the French King Charles the Fair passes away without a male heir, and under Salic law, this gives his throne to his cousin. But the only problem with this is that his nephew, Edward of England, claims the throne to be his own. So this little familial dispute over the French throne causes the 100 Years' War between France and England. The day after war was declared, the first wave of the bubonic plague ravaged the kingdom, killing almost half of its citizens. But this didn't stop the war from continuing. After a few declarations of peace and rebirths of war, the French kept hold of their territories. This war strengthened the sense of French nationalism and hate towards the English, which burned passionately into the next century. The French were pulled into another war, this time against the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and Italy. From this war, they gained territories to look more like the France that we know today. Now, hearing of the New World, full of resources and riches, the French sent an explorer named Jacques Cartier. And from his first settlement in Newfoundland, the French kingdom ceased to exist, and the French Empire took its place. Although French expansionism was slowed, as they broke out into a civil war between Protestants and Catholics, many other nations involved themselves in this war in defense of their own faiths. But in the end, the Catholics won. Although, France was pulled into another religious war, known as the 30 Years' War, that they won. But the Spanish, who were angry that they lost the war, declared war on France once again. These wars depleted the French manpower so much that the population didn't want to leave their homes in search of a new life in their colonies in the Americas and onwards. This meant that New France stayed as a sparse population over a wide area, and the English took advantage of this when, over a border dispute, they created a global conflict. This war the French lost, which lost them their American colonies and spiraled France into debt. In a bitter last-ditch effort to get back at the English, the French sent supplies and funding for the American Revolution, which sent them further into debt and unknowingly started their own revolution. The French, sick of their living conditions and the state of their homes, revolted against the monarchy and created a state for the people, a state by the people, a state of equality, while in the process killing 40,000 of the people. But I guess they had the mentality that
everyone's equal when they're dead.
Many European powers saw this and feared for the safety of their own monarchical powers, so they created a coalition and declared war on France. But the coalition of England, Spain, Prussia, and many others had only their own power in mind, so they had little to no cohesion in their armies and were easily defeated. There was a small counter-revolution led by the people who were sick of the death and terror and destruction of the French Revolution, but they were easily quelled. A second anti-republic coalition was formed to restore the monarchy to the French throne, but it failed. This war gave France many puppet states in Germany, North Italy, and Spain, while also seeing the rise in popularity of a general, Napoleon Bonaparte. After this, Maximilien Robespierre, the leader of the revolution and the leader of France, was considered to be a tyrant and was executed, but replaced with an equally tyrannical government, which was overthrown by a coup led by Napoleon Bonaparte. Several more coalitions were formed to restore the monarchy to France, but most of them failed and kept giving France puppet states and more territory. This is until France invaded Russia, and their army was decimated by the winter cold, and pushed back until Napoleon's greatest defeat in Waterloo. Napoleon was banished, but he did return to France to the joy of the people, but he was defeated before he could gain enough power to fight back. France now continued their colonial presence in Africa with the conquering of Algeria, but their endeavors were halted by a second French Revolution, which created the Second French Republic, but it was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War. Afterwards, French colonialism continued as scheduled. Fear mounted across Europe as the newly formed German Empire became increasingly power-hungry. So in precaution, France entered an alliance with Russia. Their suspicions were correct, as Germany invaded most of their neighbors in brutal trench warfare. The Germans easily occupied the ill-defended French north, but they were eventually stopped. Many French were killed due to poor uniform color, the bright blue standing against the browns and grays of the landscape. After years of fighting, Germany was eventually defeated, but not without heavy losses on the French side. Though, French aggression wasn't over, as they sent troops to aid the White Russians fight the Bolsheviks in the communist uprising. But support for communism was overwhelming, so the French troops were eventually evacuated. This period saw the rise in popularity of communism, to the point where the French people elected the leader of the Socialist Party for a year before they kicked him out of office. While also, heavy fortifications were built along the German border to deter further German invasions, known as the Maginot Line. But, against all efforts of appeasement, the German ambitions couldn't be quelled and they invaded. The Germans used the same strategy as they did in World War I, by going around the French front line through Belgium and capitulating them within 6 weeks. Out of this capitulation was created Vichy France, a puppet state of the German Empire. Although officially German puppets, the French people never stopped fighting against the Reich and their injustices. France was finally liberated by the Allies in the Normandy invasions, but was left in a horde state, with much of their infrastructure destroyed in combat. The period after World War II saw a slow, painful dissolution of the French Empire, where they lost most of their colonies. But they never lost French Guiana. With a new development program, France became the 4th largest nuclear power in the Cold War and a strong ally to NATO. Soon after, the French president advocated for a united European alliance, which many European nations joined, known as the European Union. Recently, many French citizens took to the streets, clad in yellow vests, to protest the current president Emmanuel Macron's pro-business policies. This has taken form in leaning away from government-funded programs. But the straw that broke the camel's back that led to these protests was the raise in gas taxes, which has taken a considerable toll on the middle class. Although Macron repealed these taxes, the people still want more, and continue to be injured and arrested in these protests. Some say this may spark a global revolution in many right-wing countries. Although France is modernly portrayed as a white flag-bearing cowardly nation, its history shows that can't be farther from the truth. As a militarily elite nation, a global power at the center of global politics, with the people unafraid of death and persecution for what they believe.